Hey guys, so I just wanted to explain a little bit here real quick before the video started, and I didn't really know what to put here because I didn't want the video to be playing in the background as I'm saying all of this, but this video is very long. As you can probably see, it is over an hour long, and that's because I wanted to do this one a little bit differently. Um, I wanted to have this be more of like a tutorial rather than a watch me work type of video like my other character art type of videos are. Because I just want to see, how this goes. And I want to know how you guys feel about this. Like, do you like these character art videos to be more of a tutorial style where I can uh, slow it down, have it in real time, so you guys can see fully what I'm doing and I'm able to explain better what I'm doing? Or do you guys prefer the watch me work type of videos where I kind of just tell you the basics of what I'm doing and like what I'm painting, but I don't go into like full detail, and it is sped up pretty fast because these character videos always take forever to film and there's a lot of footage, and I do have to speed them up quite a bit, otherwise they will be an hour long like this one. So you will have to let me know what you think and how you feel. But other than that, let's get right into this video. Hey guys, so for day 18 of Halloween nail designs, I am going to paint the Jack Skellington that is on my Loungefly bag. I thought it'd be really cool to paint him for a Halloween design, and I really like the design of this Loungefly bag. I'll have a picture up for reference so you guys can see. So to start off, I'm just taking Grave Digger by Nails by Dev and painting the nail with this. I do 2 coats of this and I cure each coat for 60 seconds. And this is the only nail that I am going to be doing for this video because I knew he was going to take a long time to paint, and I didn't really want this video to be too long. And I didn't want to do like a whole set for it either. I just really wanted to paint him. So now I'm taking the sketching gel from Ball Pit, and I'm using this to draw out my outline for Jack. And I'm starting out with the like jagged pumpkin side first, just so I can get that done. I did try to do this differently at first, and I started with like his skeleton half at first, but I was doing it too small for it to like fit all the little jagged pieces, at least for my abilities. I know there are plenty of people out there who can do super small scale paintings. I am not one of those, so I do have to do a larger scale when it comes to doing these paintings on nails. So that is why I started out with the jagged pumpkin side first, because I felt like it'd be easier for me to get all of those little jagged edges in first and then use those as my reference points for all of the other details that are going to go on his face and stuff, and also like to help me guide where like certain parts of his face, like the outline of his face, go and all of that. So I'm just, trying to do the little jagged pieces here. It is a little confusing, like looking at it on the nail, and you really have to focus and pay attention to what you're doing and what part you're at and everything. Especially for something like this where it just looks like a bunch of random zigzag lines on here, I was low-key getting a little confused and like looking at the wrong part at some parts, and I'm like, when I look back down at the nail, I was like, wait, I think I already did that. And I'm like looking back and forth constantly between the bag and the nail, and trying to get it all drawn on how it needs to be drawn on. Also, if you don't have the sketching gel from Ball Pit to do your outline for any nail art that you might be doing, whether it's, portrait, character art, or whatever, you can use a jelly black color. So if you have like the shading gel from Nails by Dev, you can use that as well. She does also have a brown shading gel. So you can use one of those. You could even make your own like jelly black color by mixing some black into a clear base and go about that way. If you really wanted to, you could use just the plain black polish or like a black liner gel or whatever, but I personally don't like using a fully pigmented black for my outline, my first basic outline, whenever doing nail art, because if you do go over it, it does tend to show through. So that's why I really like this polish, the sketching gel, for doing outlines and stuff like this and getting my sketch down first, because it doesn't show through any of the polish that you paint on top of it. Same with like if you were to water down, I guess, a black polish and make it jelly or more sheer, it won't show through as easily as just a plain fully opaque black polish would show through. Okay, and then here you can see I am using those little jagged points to figure out where the like top half of the pumpkin and like the stem of the pumpkin are gonna go, and how it needs to line up to make sure that it fits and is in the proper position compared to the actual bag, which again is why I did those jagged edges first, because it made it a whole lot easier to make sure that everything was in place. Now I'm going in and doing the little stem. Again, just trying to line everything up compared to where those jagged edges are. And as you can see, some of my lines are on the thicker side, some of them are on the thinner side, some of them are a little darker, some of them are a little lighter. As long as I can see the lines that I'm doing, like, I don't really care about necessarily how this sketch looks like when it comes to like the weight of the lines and like how thick they are or how thin they are, because I can go in when I paint and like kind of adjust that and fix it. Also, like whenever I do the outlining at the end, it does like help to cover everything, make sure that with the colors that I'm using to paint the entire thing and then the outline afterwards, you're not going to be able to see this first outline that I did or that you did if you're following along with this. So the sketch, your very first sketch here with the outline, it doesn't have to be super perfect, but you do want to make sure that like things are lined up where they're supposed to be and like proportions are how they need to be. But like I said, it doesn't have to be 100% perfect, because you are going to be going in and covering that up anyhow in the end. Then I did the little top part of his skull along with his bottom, like, I guess, jaw. And now I'm doing that little part there. I think it's like his eyebrow, or like that part of the skull there that kind of sticks up a little bit and is a little more like square-ish. I mean, it's not a square, but like it's not rounded like a circle, or like, you know, it has more straight lines on it. I will say I did make that a little small, I feel like, compared to how it should have been, but it ended up working out in the end. Um, See, I feel like it does look pretty small. It's not as wide as it should have been, but like I said, it worked out in the end. Like, it looks fine in the end. Um, but yeah, realistically, it should have been a teensy bit wider. Now I am going in here and trying to figure out the placement of his facial features. So now I'm doing his eye, which is, I don't really know how to describe this shape. So I did that like little curved line to make it so it looks like, you know, he's not squinting his eye, but like it looks angry, you know? And then I'm just going in on the bottom and having that rounded part there again to make it look like a very like angry type of look, like how he looks there, you know. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not the best at explaining how to do things like after the fact, so like doing these tutorials are a little bit difficult for me, trying to explain like what I'm doing and like how I'm doing it. I should probably start doing these like talking in real time, but also that would take me so long because I tend to talk a lot, and like I can't talk and do something at the same time. I have to either just talk or I have to just do the stuff. Anyhow, so there I just did his little like smile, and then I'll go in and add on all of the stitches, which realistically I didn't have to add on all of the like stitches and his little nose and all those little extra lines there for that, like the creases that make his eye like actually look like he's like making that angry look with his eyes at this point, because it all does get covered up anyways, but it does help to add on some of these little details so you can make sure that stuff is lined up and where it needs to be. But like I said, the stitches didn't have to go on, and then all those extra little lines around the eyes didn't have to go on. I really just needed to get his eye on and that first line for his mouth, just so I could have like the basic place of where it needs to be. So that's another thing when you're doing like character art like this, or even like portraits. Your first outline here, your first sketch, it doesn't have to have all the details that are going to be on the finished result. You kind of just need like the basic parts of the character. So like I said, the eye and the mouth. I mean, realistically, I didn't really need to do the mouth either, because it is just that line. It's not like an actual mouth like, let's say, Oogie Boogie has up there or something. You know, it is just that line, so I could have just easily painted that on. His nose, which is just that tiny little dot, all those extra lines, you don't have to add that on to your first initial sketch here, but if it helps you out in the end to have all that on there to make sure that everything is going to fit and look right, then add that on. That's why I added on, because like I've mentioned before, I do tend to have issues with proportion, sizes, and everything, and like making sure things are where they need to be placed. So adding on some of these little extra details does help me a little bit to make sure that it is going to look right once it's done. Then I do his other eye there, which is just the triangle, and part of it does go off the nail because of how big I did this. So I only had to do like that part of the top half of it, and then like that bottom line there. And then just going in and doing his neck. And again, I'm using the features on his face to make sure that the neck is in the correct position and is the correct thickness, because he has a super skinny neck. So for the colors here, I'm going in with the black and the white from Ball Pit, and I'm also using Foggy Mist from Nails by Dev, which is a lighter shade of gray than that first gray that I did. I also did put out some of that Gravedigger on my palette as well, you can see there. Just in case I need to like touch up any spots, or I need to go over something that wasn't supposed to be a different color, then that way I can like cover it and it will match the background. So now I'm just going in and I'm doing all of the black parts first. So his eyes and then that mouth part over on the pumpkin side. And I also ended up doing his mouth on the skeleton side as well. I think I did like some of the lines and his nose around his eye and his nose as well, but I really shouldn't have, because those are all getting covered up. I really didn't think about it when I was doing it, how those were going to get covered up. I was just like, oh, I'm using the black right now, doing all the black parts, and I just went in and did that as well. Like, I went over it. Like, I wasn't thinking, I'm like, oh, I have the black out, let me just do this right now. But yeah, I should have waited to do that. But it really doesn't matter. Like I said, it gets covered up. And I'm going to go back over it anyhow. I like to, whenever it's possible, just focus on one color at a time. So when I can, I'll just do like all of the black parts first, flash cure that, then go on and move on to whatever color I need next. So like the lighter gray or whatever, get that done, flash cure that. That way I'm not constantly having to switch back and forth between colors, and I'm not having to clean my brush off a whole bunch of times. I just feel like it's a little more convenient and it doesn't take up as much time. I mean, cleaning your brush off and switching between colors doesn't really take that much time. But, anywhere where I can save even just a few seconds, I will. So I just feel like this, saves me a little bit of time. So that way I'm not, going back and forth all the time. So just going through, doing all of the black. I did fill in that black side of the pumpkin as well, and the eye. And then after I get all of the black on, I did do a full 60-second cure on this, because there is some parts in the eye that have to have that lighter gray on it. And also when it came to like the highlight, the yellow part on the pumpkin side, I wasn't sure, how thick of a strip I was gonna do, or like if it was gonna go over the black or over the orange or whatever. So I did just go ahead and cure this black for a full 60 seconds just to make sure that it was all going to be fully cured, since it was going to potentially get covered by some other colors. And then for the mouth part that transitions from the pumpkin mouth to like the skeleton mouth, I just drew like a solid line of where I wanted the black to end. And then with that polish and whatever was left on my brush, I just kind of took it and feathered it out a little bit and kind of tried to mimic those little like streaky lines that were there on there to show that like transition from the dark fully black pumpkin mouth into going over to the skeleton face. So now I'm just going in with that light gray color and just doing all of the lighter spots that are going to be on Jack's face. So, like the highlighted parts, I guess. So just this tiny little line up here at the top of that eyebrow thing. I don't really know what to call that part of his head. Also, with like the side of that as well. And I did a solid line of that, so it was very defined. Just kind of outlined the top and the side there. And then I think I also went in and kind of like blended it out of, yeah, here I am just blending it out a little bit. So just taking whatever is left on my brush as well as the polish that is there on the nail already and just kind of feathering it out a little bit to blend it into that darker gray that's already down because that's how it looks on the bag itself. And that's really how I went about doing any of like the highlighting and shadowing. I showed it here right up close so you can kind of see. I know it is a little hard to see because the two grays are very similar in color. Um, they're just slightly different. I mean, you can see they're on the palette. They are different, but not like super super different, and it is a little bit difficult to see, especially on camera. um but yeah, now I'm just going in, doing all of that like highlighted area. I'm doing above his eye now. And again, I just start out by outlining that entire section of where it's at, and then I will go back in and kind of feather it out to allow it to blend in a little bit more into that gray to make it look more seamless and to give it the same effect as it does on the bag, because the bag does kind of look like a pencil drawing almost. You know how you can see like all the pencil marks and everything, and like when you do shading with like a pencil and you do like the little dashes to do that, you can like see each one of those little dashes. That's kind of the same sort of look that's going on with this bag. So I was trying to recreate that and mimic that here on my nail. And this whole, like the whole bottom half of his face pretty much gets covered with this light gray. That's why I said I kind of wasted my time and some polish when doing his mouth there, because it is going to get covered up completely. I low key was not really paying attention to that when I was doing all of this. So then when I got to doing this part is when I realized like, oh, this entire bottom half is that lighter color, and I'm going to either have to try and go around all of those little stitches and like his mouth and everything, or I can just cover it all up and then redo the mouth and all those stitches, which is going to be the easier option to do rather than trying to go around each individual little section there. Um, so yeah, I just went through, covered it all up, and again, trying to keep that like pencil kind of sketch drawing kind of look with it, and keeping it kind of like on the more streaky side so you could see like the um what's it called, the like brush strokes and everything. And then there was a little bit of highlight that I needed to do up here, like at the top part of the skull above his eye. I'm just doing some little wispy lines there. And then after I got all of this on, I did cure it for a full 60 seconds because I felt like I wanted it to be just a tiny bit lighter. So I did go in and very lightly over top of all of those areas that I did, I added in some white just to lighten it up a little bit more because it was still a little too dark for my liking. You could leave it like that if you're fine with it, but like I said, I didn't really like. I felt like it needed to be a little bit lighter to match the bag a little bit more. So, like I said, just having a very little amount of the white on my brush, and then just very lightly adding on some more white to brighten up some of those areas. And if it was somewhere that needed even more white, because there are some spots in that lighter gray area that are like pretty much white, I did put more white on those spots than I did in some other spots because not there's like not a whole lot of white on there, but there is some spots that need to be white, if that makes sense. I feel like it doesn't, but you can see what I'm doing here. And like I said, very light strokes, still really trying to keep that like sketched out kind of pencil drawing kind of look. And then after I got that all on, I did go ahead and flash cure that, since that was the last layer for the moment on this part. Also, if I felt like I added too much white in a certain section, I was able to just grab some of that lighter gray that I had and just apply that on to darken it up a little bit again. I did add in a little bit of that darker gray as well to help darken certain areas. And this, when I was doing this part, the white was still wet. I really just wanted all of that to like blend together very easily. I didn't want it to be like separate sections or like separate layers. Just because I did kind of mess up in a little some of spots and made them a little too light, and I needed to darken them up again, but I didn't want it to look like it was a separate layer, if that makes any sense. Because usually you can tell whenever you do like one layer and then you cure that fully, you paint on top of it, cure that fully, do another layer. Like you can tell that there's different layers and they are different layers, whereas doing a wet on wet technique like this, it all just blends together and becomes like one layer. Now I'm just adding the black onto his neck to give that like shadowing down on his neck. So I just like outlined the top half of it there, and then like that. What side is that? The left side, a full outline, and then I just the same way that I did earlier, just kind of feathered it out a little bit, get those like choppy looking lines going on, and then flash cured that before moving on to the next step. And I also went back in and redid the his nose and his mouth afterwards. I thought I did that with what's it called? The my liner gel when I went through and outlined everything, but apparently I just went in and did it with the black gel polish. Um so yeah, just did the mouth again for what, the third time now? I could have saved myself some time by not even including that in the first place when I did the original outline of it. But then I really could have saved myself even more time by not like painting it on with the black before I did the rest of it. But you know, if you've been watching me long enough, you know I like to make things more difficult for myself when they don't need to be. Okay, so now for the pumpkin side, I'm using Trick or Treat from Nails by Dev, brownie batter, caramel drizzle. What else do I have here? Evil Eye, spiked lemonade. Okay, and that was it for the colors that I pulled out for the pumpkin. I do have to do a little bit of color mixing to get the exact colors that I need for like the little highlights and lowlights and shadowing and shading and all of that. So here I'm mixing that orange. I'm doing a little bit of brown in there to get the like dark orange that's for the shadowing on the pumpkin. And my disclaimer, because I am mixing two different brands together, you really aren't supposed to be mixing two different brands together because their formulations are different. They may not be compatible with each other. They may have different cure times, all that jazz. So you're really not supposed to mix them together because you don't know how it's going to react and if it's going to cure properly and all of that. But like I say, sometimes you have to do it when you don't have the right colors, and then you have like the perfect colors to mix together from two different brands. So just be extra careful and extra cautious if you are mixing two different brands together like this. I personally have never had an issue with it, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything. I could end up having issues later on down the road, potentially. Um, so, you know, do what you will with that information. Now I'm just mixing together some orange and yellow to create like the highlights for the highlight on the pumpkin, because there is like this little like splotch of yellow that looks like a shiny spot, like if you were to be shining a light on it and it like, the spotlight kind of spot, if that makes any sense. So trying to mix up a really light, like orangey yellow kind of color to try and get that. It took me a while to get this color the way that I wanted it, and I still don't think I got it fully how it needed to be, which I'll explain that later on. Now I'm just mixing up a darker yellow for the outline part of the pumpkin, or like the part where it's carved out and you can see like kind of the wall of the pumpkin, that part. You can see it on like the eye and the mouth and like where it's jagged there, like next to the skeleton face. Did mix in a little bit of orange into that just to get it a little more of an orangey yellow. But it definitely was, I needed it to be more yellow than orange. So that's why I mixed together those two yellows at first. Now I'm just going in with that orange color on its own and filling in the entire pumpkin. It does look a little bright right now. But once we add on all of the like highlights and the lowlights and like the shading lowlights, that's for hair. The highlights and the shadows and shading and stuff. It'll all come together and it'll look the same as on the bag. And then, like I've been saying for everything else, because I am going to be painting over this orange, I do cure this for a full 60 seconds. And I did only do one coat of this orange. I know you can tell some spots here are looking a little splotchy and questionable, and you can kind of see the gray popping through, but trust me, it all works out in the end. Trust the process, I guess. Even though I don't personally ever trust the process, everyone always says trust the process for everything, and I never trust the process ever. Um, I kind of just go with it, and I'm like, it's either gonna look good in the end or it's not. Like, and especially when it starts going south and it's not looking right at first, I'm like, oh, this is bad. This is real bad, and it's not gonna look good, and we're not gonna come back from this. I'm gonna have to restart this. But I do continue, usually until the end. Sometimes I will stop in the middle of what I'm doing and realize like there's no coming back from this. But most of the times I do keep going even when it does look kind of funky, just to see and hope that it does come together in the end. But like I said, sometimes you just know it's not going to come together. So you got to completely scrap it and start all over. Thankfully, I didn't have to do that with this nail. Otherwise, I was going to be so upset because total for just this one nail, the total time it took me to do this was like a little over 2 hours. Um, so yeah, character art like this takes a long time to do, especially when there's like a whole bunch of little details added on, adding on top of the fact that half of this is in like a monochromatic kind of like grayscale color scheme, which is, in my opinion, anything that's like monochromatic, like a monochromatic type of color scheme, is so much harder to get right compared to having, a whole bunch of different colors. So like that gray situation going on the other side was way harder for me to do than this side over here with the pumpkin, where I have the different colors and everything. And like even other characters, like for example, who else have I done? Lizzie McGuire. She was a lot easier because she had all the different colors. She had all those different colors, and it was easy to, get the shading with that and like the highlights and everything with that. Although she was a 2D character, and I really didn't put that much effort into her. Or even like my Pikachu one from Valentine's Day. He was even a lot easier because he had more colors going on, and it was a lot easier to do like the highlights and shadowing and everything. Whereas, yeah, grayscale, even if it's not a grayscale monochromatic theme, but it's just like you're using all the same, like you're using only blues, only shades of blues to do some sort of art. Like those, the sisters from the Proud Family. I forgot what their names were, but they were all blue. Like doing them is gonna be a little bit difficult because you got to make sure you got the right shades of blue, and you got to make sure they're in the right spots. And it's, at least in my opinion, I find monochromatic color schemes to be more difficult to do than a multicolor color scheme. Oh yeah, and then I was also feeling bold while doing this set, and before curing the orange, I went straight in and painted the stem of the pumpkin brown. Why I did that, I don't know. Personally, I don't recommend it, because then if they mix all together, that's gonna look funky. They're gonna get muddy. You're gonna have color where it shouldn't be. But yeah, I did it. I don't know why. I recommend at least flash curing the first color you did, and then doing the second color. But yeah, I did not do that. Okay, and now I'm taking that darker brown to add on like the darker parts of the stem. So I just kind of took that darker brown, and from the base of the stem, which is attached to the pumpkin part, and just kind of dragged it up a little bit. And then I think I did a little bit from the top of the stem going down a little bit to, give it that like darker at the base, darker at the tip, and then lighter in the middle type of situation going on there. Um, that was a great description. Hopefully, when you see the reference picture, you can kind of get better what I'm trying to say there. Also, I do apologize. I feel like it's a little bit difficult to see. I probably should have zoomed in a little bit more so you could really see up close what was going on. Now I'm using that darker orange that I had mixed up to do the little shading around the eye. Same like how I did on the other half of the face. I did the line, like outlining it first, and then I kind of just like feathered it up to create that blend and to get it to look the way that it needed to look. And I did that wherever that needed to be done, like the around the eye. I think on some of the little like jagged edges, it had that, and then like the bottom half of the pumpkin, like the jaw of the pumpkin, um, had that darker orange as well. And then also I cured that for a full 60 seconds because I did have to go in and do that little like spotlight color that I said, as well as I was going to have to do some black lines on it as well later. So because more colors were getting added on top, I did have to cure for a full 60 seconds. And anytime you see me pausing, that's just me looking at the bag and figuring out like what needs to go where and like how it needs to be. And that's like the super important thing about doing character art or like portraits or anything. You do need a reference picture unless you're like one of those really cool people that have like a photographic memory and can like actually draw and paint and stuff like from that photographic memory. Like that is so cool. I wish I was like that. But anyhow, I am not, and I have to use a reference picture like I feel like most of us do. um but anyhow, you do want to make sure you have a reference picture unless you want to try doing it without a reference picture. I don't recommend, but you can try. Yeah, having a reference picture is super important whenever doing stuff like this, so you can constantly like look back and forth at the reference picture and what you're doing to make sure that it is looking the way it needs to be, and so you're adding on all those details that need to be added on. You really have to like really study your reference picture and like really look at every little thing about it so you can get all of those teeny tiny little details, because even the smallest little thing that you think doesn't really matter does matter, and it's going to make a huge difference. Like it's insane how like the smallest teeniest tiniest little detail can make such a huge difference on stuff like this. So always make sure you have your reference picture and you're always looking back at it to make sure that things are going the way that they should be. Okay, so now for that yellow highlight spotlight spot that I've been talking about, I just take that lighter yellow that I mixed up and did that little spot up there at the top, drew the little oval, and then filled that all in. And then once I got it all filled in, I realized something was not right with the color. So I added in a little bit more orange. I just took some orange off my palette, put it on there, and then just kind of mixed it around on the nail right there to give it more of an orangey look. And it still just wasn't looking right. So I went back and forth and like mixed in some more orange. I mixed the orange in. I mixed the lighter yellow in. I think I even mixed in the darker yellow. Um, I'm trying to think. Did I mix in any of the brown? I don't think so. I think I stuck with like the orange and those two yellows to try and get it to look how it was needing to look, but it still wasn't looking right. And then I came to the conclusion that I maybe probably should have done this like with a jelly color or mixed up that lighter yellow color and then add in clear to it to make it a little more sheer, because on the bag it does like I tried to make it bigger too because I felt like it wasn't the right shape either. But anyhow, going back to how I was looking closer at the bag, it was looking like it was underneath everything, and or like you could see through it at the very least. Not necessarily that it was underneath, but like that you could see through it, I guess. And so I took this cleanup brush here, dipped it in alcohol, and removed a lot of that polish that was there in the middle to make it hopefully a little more see-through. And I did like drag in to the middle what was around the edges there to kind of fill it in a little more so it didn't look like a weird ring that was missing like the middle part of um what was supposed to be there or whatever, just to kind of shear it out a little bit, because like I said, I was realizing on the bag it was like you could see through it and you weren't being able to see that because it was, you know, opaque on the nail. And that definitely helped a lot. I do still think maybe I should have mixed clear into that yellow that I mixed up and like made it more sheer or more jelly like to get it to look more closer to how it was supposed to look. But overall, I think like removing a lot of that polish off of the nail and like kind of, I guess, like shearing it out with the alcohol really helped with it a lot. Went ahead, flash cured that. Now I'm going in with that darker yellow that I mixed up and just adding that on to wherever it needs to be added on to give that illusion of, you know, a carved pumpkin. And when you see, and you can see like the thickness of the wall of the pumpkin, give that same illusion there. And then once I got that on, I did I think I went ahead and cured for 60 seconds because I was pretty much done with that. I just needed to do like the outlining and any final little details. So I'm pretty sure I did end up doing a full 60-second cure after this, so I could just go in and do like, you know, the outlining and all of that. And then for the eye, I just painted the yellow onto the black. I think I did it kind of like a little bit on the orange, but I mainly painted it on the black. And it showed up perfectly fine on top of the black there. So that just goes to show you how pigmented these ball pit colors are, because that's Evil Eye and Spiked Lemonade mixed together with a little bit of that orange, what is it, Trick or Treat from Nails by Dev. Nails by Dev is also super pigmented, but it was mainly ball pit colors there mixed together, so that's how pigmented those are. And then I did do a little bit of like highlighting up there on this little top jagged edge of the pumpkin that needed some little highlighting. Okay, so now I'm just going in with the black and just doing some little details. I outlined the base of the stem. I'm not gonna lie, I don't know why I decided to go in and do these details with the black polish when I was going to go in with the liner gel next, but whatever. I used the black polish to do this, to add the details for the stem to make it look like it was like, you know, in the pumpkin and not just kind of sitting on top. And then I add like the little lines that are on the pumpkin. And again, I use the little jagged edges there to kind of help me, like, guide me where I need to put them. And I put that one on the wrong part, and that's why I'm going in with that cleanup brush and wiping that off because it needed to be on the one above it. And then there was a couple more lines that were put on like closer towards the eye and like going down below the eye and all of that. And then once I got all that on, I did cure for 60 seconds. I forgot, I also, while those lines were still wet, I think. Again, I don't know why I did it while it was still wet. Same way I don't know why I did the stem while the rest of the pumpkin was still wet. But while it was still wet, I went in on some of those little lines and added on some little shadowing next to them with that darker orangey brown color, because that's just what it was looking like on the bag. So like I said, just trying to add all the details that were on the bag onto the nail, because every little detail matters and it does make a difference, even though it may be really hard to see, and I feel like on camera you can't see it at all at this point. It does make a difference. I also added on the little black lines that were on the stem as well. And now for the final step before going in and top coating. I'm just taking the Emo Black Liner Gel from Ball Pit and using this to do all of the outlining on a jack, as well as adding any other small tiny little black details that needed to be added on afterwards. To do the outline, I am using a 12mm liner brush. It just makes doing outlining a whole lot easier because it does help to absorb any of the shakiness you might be experiencing. It also makes it easier, at least for me, it makes it easier to do thin lines because I can put a lot less pressure on it, like at the tip of it, because it is longer, which is something I need to work on with whenever I'm using my 9mm, because sometimes, you know, even when using the 9mm, I do need some super thin lines, so that is something I need to work on. But yeah, just outlining is a lot easier if you use a 12mm, mainly because it does absorb the shakiness that you may be experiencing. I know a lot of people ask about like shakiness and how to do nail art when you're shaky. One thing, you can use a longer liner brush, like a 12, 15, 20, 25, whatever, to help, because like I said, it does absorb the shakiness a little bit because it is longer and you're more likely using the tip of the brush. And anyhow, also another thing that I personally do, I've mentioned this before in a couple videos, whenever I'm painting, I know everyone always says they hold their breath whenever they're doing stuff like this, which I think for the most part they're like joking, but I do think some people actually do hold their breath. But for me, and I learned this from my bus driver way back in middle school when I was complaining about not being able to paint my left hand well because my hand was so shaky all the time. Or paint my right hand. I'm right-handed. My right hand is like not ever shaky, but my left hand, on the other hand, it's always so shaky and unstable. So I was complaining about not being able to get my right hand painted nice because my left hand was always so shaky. So my bus driver overheard me saying this, and she said, if you breathe through your mouth, it helps to stabilize your hand. And like, she couldn't explain why that worked. I can't explain why it works, but it works. So if you breathe through your mouth whenever you're doing your nail art, it will help also with not having the shakiness. Like I said, my right hand is pretty stable, pretty steady, but I still always just breathe through my mouth whenever I'm doing like intricate nail art like this, or like doing character art, or having to do straight lines on a nail or something, you know. So I always breathe through my mouth, which is one reason why you'll never get a face cam from me, because the way I sit whenever I'm painting, I'm all like hunched over, and I probably look, you know, like Quasimodo as I'm sitting there. but also because I, am breathing through my mouth, and I'm sure that looks wild. Um, so, yeah, if you struggle with your hands shaking, whether it's your dominant hand or your non dominant hand, just try breathing through your mouth and seeing if that helps. Helps me, works for me, might help and work for you. I don't know. Again, I can't explain it. I don't know how, don't know why, but it works. So, just going through outlining everything that needs to be outlined. So, the entire, you know, I was gonna say the entire outline of the pumpkin and Jack's like skeleton head, but I mean, anyhow, and doing all the little, I don't know. I'm just outlining. I don't know why I'm trying to make it more complicated than it needs to be. I'm just outlining it. And whenever I use liner gel, you kind of saw it there at the beginning when I first pulled it out. I do mix it up beforehand. I usually don't do that on camera. But liner gels, you do always want to make sure you stir them up before you use them because they do separate, especially if you don't use them a lot. So just stir them up. You can get one of those fancy little stir sticks that they sell, or I just use a dotting tool to stir them up. Swirl it around a few times, and then you're good to go. And I personally like to take my brush and dip it into the liner gel and put some on my palette. That way I can run my brush through the liner gel and like make sure there's not too much product on it, because when you just dip it into the pot, like it does tend to like have that little ball at the end, and you don't want that. You do want like a nice thin even coating on your brush whenever you're doing nail art, or especially when you're doing outlines like this. So I do put some on my palette so I can just run it through and make sure that I don't have too much product on my brush. I think a lot of people will just dip into the pot and then like wipe it off the edges of on the edges of the pot, but I don't like doing that because then it like gets all over the top of the pot and then it's a whole big mess and you got gel polish on the cap and everything, and then you're getting it everywhere. So I don't do that. Like I said, I put it on the palette. And then once I get all of the outlining done and all of the little extra details, I did add on a few extra little lines on that divide there between the pumpkin side and the skull side, because there were some that I missed and didn't add on when I originally like did any of the black work. So I just added those on. Again, just making sure that I have, all those tiny little details on there before I finish it, to make sure that it looks how it needs to look. And then once I get that all done, I do go ahead and cure for a full 60 seconds. And now for top coat, I'm using the Nails by Dev matte top coat because I felt like this nail was going to look best if it was matte. I think it would look great if it was shiny as well. I just felt like matte was going to be the best look for this. So I applied that, cured it for 60 seconds, and like I always say whenever using this top coat, it is a wipe off top coat. So after you cure it, it is going to still look shiny. So you do have to wipe it off with alcohol. to remove that sticky layer. I don't even actually know if that layer is sticky or not. I never touched it. Anyhow, wipe that off to get the matte effect to show up, and this is the finished result, and I am so happy with this nail. It came out so good. I like words can't even I can't even begin to put into words like how proud I am of this nail. I've done a Nightmare Before Christmas set before, and I've painted Jack Skellington before, but like this nail right here does not compare to that. Like this one it blows that painting, that original one, out of the waters. And this is hands down the best character art that I have ever painted on a nail. I am so happy with it, and because I don't usually brag too much about, whenever I do nail art, but I'm gonna brag this time because it came out so good and I'm so proud of it. Like, this is my best work I have ever done, and I'm so proud of myself for putting in all of the work and doing all the practice and everything to get to this point, because I'm so happy with this. And this is my absolute favorite nail that I have done this entire Halloween season. But anyways, that is it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it.